Blood dripped from the edge of the mahogany bar, slipping quietly into the shadows. But Camilla did not blink. She just swallowed the last of her cheap tequila at exactly 2:13 a.m. She thought she was just another invisible woman drowning a bad day. She had no idea the most dangerous man in Chicago was watching her every move. The neon sign of the Cobalt Lounge buzzed a sickly, flickering blue, casting long, distorted shadows across the wet pavement of Chicago's South Side. Inside, the air was thick with the suffocating scent of stale gin, expensive cigar smoke, and the quiet desperation of people who had nowhere else to be. The lounge was a neutral zone, a place where the city's worst predators came to drink in an uneasy truce. At table 7, tucked away in the darkest corner of the sprawling room, sat Gennaro Russo. He was a man made of sharp angles, tailored Italian wool, and cold, uncompromising violence. As the undisputed head of the Russo syndicate, men spoke his name in hushed whispers, terrified that just uttering the syllables would summon him from the shadows. He ruled the downtown territories with an iron fist, his reputation forged in blood and calculated ruthlessness. Tonight, he was supposed to be waiting for a lucrative shipment of stolen military-grade weapons from the port. But his dark, calculating eyes were fixed entirely on the woman sitting alone at the far end of the bar. Camilla Vitale was not the type of woman the underworld typically noticed, nor was she the type of woman who sought their attention. She was soft where the women of Gennaro's violent world were sharp, carrying the generous, lush curves of a plus-sized figure that society often tried to overlook or diminish. Her thick thighs pressed comfortably against the cheap, cracked vinyl of the bar stool, and an oversized, faded black sweater had slipped off one shoulder, revealing skin that looked like flawless porcelain under the dim, dirty tavern lights. To the untrained eye, she was just a lonely, chubby woman nursing a drink at an ungodly hour, completely oblivious to the apex predators circling the room. But Gennaro Russo did not have an untrained eye. He saw everything. He watched the fascinating way she moved. There was a deliberate, haunting stillness to Camilla, an economy of motion that spoke of deep, ingrained resilience and a hyper-awareness of her surroundings. She did not fidget with her napkin. She did not scroll aimlessly on her phone. Instead, she watched the tarnished mirrors behind the bar, her dark, intelligent eyes tracking every patron, every hidden exit, every subtle shift in the room's volatile atmosphere. At 2:13 a.m., she raised a heavy glass of tequila to her lips, her expression beautifully unreadable. The heavy wooden door of the lounge suddenly swung open with a violent crash, letting in a gust of freezing rain and 3 massive men wearing the unmistakable dark green colors of a low-level street crew affiliated with the Marsh family. They were loud, sloppy, heavily intoxicated, and desperately looking for trouble to prove their worth. The leader of the trio, a hulking, tattooed man with a badly scarred jaw and dead eyes, immediately spotted Camilla. Seeing a curvy woman sitting all alone in the corner, he assumed she was easy prey, a soft target he could intimidate for his own amusement. He swaggered over, trapping her against the edge of the bar, his heavy, scarred hands slamming down on the counter on either side of her hips, effectively caging her in. From the shadows of table 7, Gennaro's lead enforcer shifted his weight, reaching instinctively under his tailored jacket for his weapon, ready to clear the room. But Gennaro held up a single, black-gloved hand. "Wait," his silent gesture commanded. The air around the Mafia Boss crackled with lethal anticipation. He wanted to see what this captivating woman would do. The thug leaned in close, breathing sour whiskey fumes and cheap tobacco into Camilla's face, his voice a nasty, guttural sneer as he demanded she leave her drink and come outside with them. Camilla did not scream for help. She did not shrink away, nor did she show a single ounce of the fear the man was trying to extract from her. Slowly, methodically, she placed her empty shot glass down on the scratched wooden counter. With a calmness that made the ambient temperature in the room seem to drop 10 degrees, she reached over to the bartender's small fruit-cutting board. A soft, plump hand closed securely around a small, heavy, solid steel ice pick. Before the hulking thug could even register her movement, Camilla drove the blunt, heavy metal handle of the pick directly into the dense cluster of nerves at his brachial plexus, striking the exact millimeter of vulnerability just under his collarbone. The strike was anatomically perfect, executed with terrifying clinical precision. The giant man dropped straight to his knees, his entire right arm instantly paralyzed and hanging dead at his side, a strangled Hamashund, agonizing gasp escaping his throat. Camilla leaned down smoothly, her face mere inches from his sweating forehead, and pressed the razor-sharp metal point of the ice pick precisely against his carotid artery. She spoke in a voice so incredibly soft and steady that it carried effortlessly across the sudden, dead silence of the bar. She calmly advised him that if his heart rate increased any further due to panic, his own bounding pulse would push his major artery right through the hardened steel tip. The thug's two companions froze completely, terrified and paralyzed by the cold, calculated precision of the soft-spoken woman they had severely underestimated. Camilla held the position for exactly 3 seconds to ensure they understood her. Then, she stepped back gracefully, tossed the ice pick onto the bar with a quiet clatter, and threw a crumpled $20 bill next to her glass. She walked out of the lounge and disappeared into the freezing Chicago rain without ever looking back, her posture perfectly straight. At table 7, Gennaro Russo felt a dark, consuming fire ignite deep within his chest, a sensation he had never experienced in his 35 years of life. He had spent his entire existence surrounded by trained assassins, hardened monsters, and beautiful hollow women, but he had never seen anything as magnificent as the soft, invisible woman who had just brought a killer to his knees with the grace of a seasoned surgeon. He turned to his lieutenant, his voice a low, gravelly command that brooked absolutely no argument. Find out everything about her, where she sleeps, where she works, who she speaks to, what she drinks. She belongs to me now. 3 days later, the criminal underworld of Chicago was violently bleeding out into the streets. Priscilla Marsh, the razor-thin, aristocratic, and utterly ruthless fixer for the Irish-American syndicate, had decided it was finally time to tear the city apart and claim the throne for herself. Priscilla was everything Camilla was not. Loud, deeply arrogant, painfully sharp-edged, and entirely devoid of a moral compass. She operated from the heavily guarded penthouses of the Gold Coast, orchestrating hostile takeovers of Russo territories with a sadistic glee that frightened even her own men. Priscilla knew that as long as Gennaro Russo drew breath, the Marsh family would never fully control the city's lucrative underground ports. So she set a trap, a beautifully orchestrated, multi-layered ambush in the desolate meat-packing district, meant to wipe the Russo king off the map forever. The ambush was a symphony of brutality. Heavy automatic fire shattered the midnight quiet, high-caliber rounds tearing effortlessly, through the reinforced steel of Gennaro's armored SUV. His loyal men went down fighting viciously, trading their lives to buy their boss the precious few seconds he needed to escape the kill zone and vanish into the labyrinth of dark, abandoned alleys. But Gennaro did not escape unscathed. A stray, armor-piercing bullet had torn directly through his lower right side, missing his vital organs by a fraction of an inch, but leaving a jagged, heavily bleeding exit wound. He dragged himself relentlessly through the rain-slicked, garbage-strewn streets, his vision blurring and darkening at the edges. He knew that if he went to any underground syndicate hospital or corrupt private clinic, Priscilla's embedded moles would find him and finish the job while he was anesthetized. He needed a complete ghost. He needed somewhere no one would ever think to look for a billionaire crime boss. Driven by primal instinct and fading adrenaline, he ended up miles away in a forgotten, working-class residential district, ultimately collapsing onto the rusted metal grating of a second-story fire escape as his dark blood pooled heavily on the iron. He was rapidly losing consciousness, the biting Chicago cold eating deep into his bones when the frosted glass window directly above him rattled loudly and slid open. Camilla Vitale looked down at the massive, bleeding Mafia Boss blocking her fire escape. Even in the miserable lighting, she knew exactly who he was. She had seen his sharp, handsome, terrifying face on the evening news, in the papers, and in the whispered, fearful warnings of the desperate people she treated off the books. Camilla was not just a woman who knew how to handle an ice pick. She was a former, highly decorated trauma surgeon who had her medical license unjustly revoked 5 years ago after she adamantly refused to let a high-ranking cartel member die on her operating table, refusing to compromise her medical oath for the DEA. Now she lived entirely in the shadows, her brilliant, analytical mind and incredibly skilled hands serving the desperate, the undocumented, and the discarded citizens of the city. Every logical instinct in her brain screamed at her to close the window and lock it tight. Getting involved with Gennaro Russo was an absolute death sentence, especially with a psychopath like Priscilla Marsh actively hunting him down. But Camilla's deep, unwavering resilience, her fundamental, agonizing inability to let a broken, bleeding thing die in front of her, swiftly overrode her logic. Hauling his massive, dead-weight muscular frame through the narrow window was a grueling, agonizing task, but her body was remarkably strong. Her soft, lush curves hid a core of absolute, unbending iron. She dragged his bleeding form onto the faded linoleum floor of her tiny, immaculate kitchen, her breath coming heavy, her mind already shifting seamlessly into the cold, intensely calculating space of a master surgeon. When Gennaro finally drifted painfully back to consciousness, the very first thing he felt was the agonizing, white-hot sting of a curved needle pulling thick synthetic thread through his torn flesh. The second thing he felt was the cold, heavy steel barrel of his own Glock 19 resting steadily against the center of his forehead. He forced his heavy eyes open. Camilla was leaning directly over him, bathed in the harsh, unforgiving yellow light of the kitchen overhead lamp. Her thick, dark hair was tied back in a messy, practical bun, and her oversized white t-shirt was heavily stained with his blood. She was stitching his side closed with incredible speed and flawless textbook technique. She held his heavy firearm casually in her left hand, aimed perfectly at his skull, while her right hand deftly finished a complex surgical knot. "Stop moving," she told him. "If you tear these deep sutures, you will bleed out on my kitchen floor," and I just mopped the linoleum. Gennaro stared up at her, the burning physical pain in his side completely eclipsed by the sudden, overwhelming force of his dark obsession. It was the woman from the Cobalt Lounge. Close up, she was even more intoxicating, a perfect contradiction of softness and steel. He noted the gentle curve of her waist, the natural flush of her full cheeks, the comforting warmth of her thick thighs pressing firmly against his uninjured side to keep him securely pinned down. He also noted the unwavering, terrifying steadiness of her hands. She was not remotely afraid of him. She was holding a loaded gun to the head of the most feared and powerful man in the Midwest, and her pulse was practically resting. "You saved my life," he rasped, his voice raw, blood dripping from his split lip. "I kept a heavy corpse out of my kitchen," she corrected him instantly, cleanly cutting the surgical thread with a pair of silver medical scissors and finally tossing his heavy gun onto the counter with a loud clatter. She stood up to her full height, her curvy frame casting a long, protective shadow over his battered body. "You owe me exactly $300 for the emergency medical supplies and the local anesthetic, Mr. Russo. Then you need to leave this building before whoever shot you tracks your blood to my front door and forces me to kill them." Gennaro slowly pushed himself up on one elbow, wincing sharply as his abdominal muscles pulled violently against the fresh, tight sutures. He looked around the modest, cramped apartment, taking in the cheap furniture and stacks of medical textbooks, and then looked back at the breathtaking, plus-sized woman who had just casually patched up a Mafia Boss as if he were a scraped knee. He knew how the underworld worked. He knew Priscilla Marsh would be tearing the city block by block to find his corpse. He knew that the very moment Priscilla discovered a rogue, underground doctor had saved his life, Camilla would be immediately placed at the top of the Irish syndicate's hit list. "I am not going anywhere," Gennaro said softly, a dark, deeply possessive promise lacing his gravelly words. "And neither are you. You are completely under my protection now, Camilla. The world outside this wooden door is about to burn to ash, and I will personally slaughter every single person who tries to bring the fire to you." Camilla crossed her arms over her chest, utterly unimpressed by the bleeding Mafia king kneeling on her kitchen floor, making grand declarations. She had survived much worse things than Gennaro Russo, and she had certainly survived worse monsters than Priscilla Marsh. But as she looked deep into Gennaro's pitch-black, obsessive eyes, she realized with a sudden, sinking feeling that he was not making an empty threat. He was making a blood vow, and a blood vow from the devil himself was the most dangerous thing a woman living in the shadows could ever possibly receive. The morning sun did little to warm the freezing Chicago streets, but inside Camilla Vitale's cramped apartment, the tension was thick enough to choke on. Gennaro Russo had not left. Instead, within an hour of his physical stabilization, his shadow network had descended upon the working-class neighborhood. Massive, heavily armed men in unassuming clothing now occupied the alleyways, the fire escapes, and the corner bodegas, turning the entire city block into an impenetrable, heavily monitored fortress. Camilla stood by her tiny stove, brewing bitter espresso, completely ignoring the fact that a billionaire syndicate leader was currently occupying her worn-out floral armchair. Gennaro watched her with an intensity that bordered on absolute madness. His dark eyes traced the generous curve of her hips, hidden beneath her scrub pants, the soft plush swell of her stomach, and the confident, grounded way she carried herself. In his violent, superficial world, women routinely starved themselves to appear fragile, sharp, and decorative. Camilla was none of those things. She was substantial, real, and possessed a quiet, dangerous gravity that pulled him in completely. He had spent the remaining hours of the night having his men run her background. He knew everything now. He knew about the brilliant trauma surgeon who sacrificed her prestigious career to maintain her morals. He knew she ran an illegal underground clinic for those who could not afford normal hospitals. And he knew that he would gladly burn the entire city of Chicago to the foundation before he let anyone harm a single hair on her head. "You cannot turn my neighborhood into a war zone, Mr. Russo," Camilla stated calmly, walking over and handing him a steaming mug of black coffee. She did not flinch when his large, calloused fingers deliberately brushed against her soft skin, lingering just a second too long. "My patients will be terrified. They already hide from the local police and the border patrols. They do not need the Italian mafia glaring at them from the stairwell." Gennaro took a slow sip, his piercing gaze never leaving her face. "My men are here to ensure you stay breathing, Camilla. Priscilla Marsh is not a rational enemy. She is a rabid dog. By now, her street enforcers are aggressively questioning every underground doctor, every pharmacist, and every back-alley fixer in the city. It will not take them long to figure out that a ghost surgeon with hands of gold stitched me back together. You are a massive target now. You belong to me, and what is mine is fiercely and heavily guarded," Camilla sighed. She was immune to cheap intimidation, but the sheer, overwhelming possessiveness radiating from Gennaro was an entirely different kind of threat. It was suffocating, yet deeply intoxicating. But before she could formulate a sharp, dismissive retort, the heavy silence of the apartment building was shattered by the distinct, deafening crack of a high-caliber suppressed sniper rifle echoing from the adjacent rooftop. The armor-piercing bullet ripped through Camilla's kitchen window, shattering the cheap glass and embedding itself deep into the drywall just inches from her head, showering the linoleum in white dust. Gennaro moved with a terrifying, explosive speed that completely defied his fresh, agonizing abdominal wound. He lunged across the small space, tackling Camilla to the floor with brute force. His massive, hard body covered her completely, pressing her lush curves firmly against the floorboards as a second, suppressed shot tore through the espresso machine, sending boiling water and ceramic shrapnel flying. He wrapped his powerful arms around her waist, shielding her entirely with his own flesh, his breathing heavy and ragged against her ear. "They found you much faster than I anticipated," Gennaro growled, pulling his Glock 19 from his waistband and chambering around with a sharp, mechanical click. Camilla did not scream. She did not cry. She simply calculated the angles of the room. "The trajectory came from the east building," she whispered, her cheek pressed against the cold floor, her mind operating with the same ice-cold logic she used in the trauma bay. "There is a blind spot in the alley, directly below the fire escape. If your men can lay down heavy covering fire, we can drop down and access the subterranean utility tunnels. I know the municipal blueprints of this entire block." Gennaro looked down at her flushed, beautiful face, absolutely mesmerized. Any other civilian would be sobbing in blinding hysterics. Camilla was orchestrating a tactical, highly efficient retreat. He keyed his two-way radio, barking harsh, violent orders in rapid Italian. Within seconds, the street below erupted into chaotic, deafening gunfire as his elite men engaged the Marsh hit squad. Moving with synchronized precision, Gennaro and Camilla crawled toward the window. Despite his fresh injury, Gennaro was an apex predator in his natural element, but it was Camilla who confidently led the way. She kicked open the fire escape grate, her strong, thick thighs driving her forward as she guided the ruthless Mafia Boss into the damp, lightless utility tunnels beneath the Chicago streets. Priscilla Marsh had just made the gravest mistake of her miserable life. She had forced the undisputed king of the underworld and the city's most brilliant, resilient surgeon into the dark together, giving them the perfect environment to plot her absolute destruction. The subterranean tunnels smelled of rust, stagnant water, and century-old brick. For 2 grueling days, Gennaro and Camilla operated out of a heavily fortified, underground Russo safehouse near the industrial shipyards. The close proximity was electric, thick with unspoken desires and high-stakes adrenaline. Every time Camilla changed Gennaro's bandages, her soft, plump hands moving with clinical perfection over his hardened, tattooed muscles, the dark obsession in his eyes grew significantly deeper. He worshipped her. He treated her lush body and brilliant mind with a terrifying, devoted reverence, constantly reminding her that she was the only queen fit to rule his violent empire. But Camilla knew that hiding in the shadows was merely delaying the inevitable. Priscilla Marsh was tearing Chicago apart, burning down legitimate Russo businesses and executing innocent civilians in her mad, desperate quest for absolute dominance. "We cannot stay down here forever," Camilla said on the 3rd evening, tracing a detailed map of the industrial shipyards spread across a rusted metal table. Her dark hair cascaded over her soft shoulders, and Gennaro reached out, wrapping a thick, silky strand possessively around his finger. Priscilla operates on pure arrogance. She thinks she is the apex predator, because no one has ever possessed the intellect to set a proper psychological trap for her. "We are going to change that tonight." Gennaro smiled, a dark, wicked expression that would have terrified any other living soul. "Tell me your brilliant plan, Mia Regina." Camilla pointed to an abandoned pharmaceutical warehouse on the desolate edge of the docks, a massive building heavily rigged with decaying industrial chemical vats. It is a labyrinth of blind corners and elevated steel walkways. We leak information through a compromised Marsh informant that I am fleeing the city by boat tonight, and that you are personally escorting me because you refuse to let me out of your sight. Priscilla will not send her disposable men to finish the job. Her ego is entirely too massive. She will come herself to execute the woman who stole her prize. The trap was set with flawless, military-grade execution. By midnight, the heavy rain had returned, drumming a relentless, echoing beat against the corrugated steel roof of the warehouse. Camilla stood completely alone in the center of the vast, cavernous floor, wearing a dark trench coat that hugged her generous, beautiful curves. She appeared vulnerable, an isolated, soft piece of bait in a vast, empty cage. But beneath her calm exterior, she was a tightly coiled spring. The heavy steel doors burst open with a violent crash, and Priscilla Marsh walked in. She was flanked by 6 heavily armed mercenaries, but Priscilla herself looked like a venomous viper, draped in expensive designer leather, her sharp, gaunt face twisted into a cruel, triumphant sneer. "Well, well," Priscilla echoed, the little chubby doctor who thought she could play in the deep water with the sharks. "Where is your monstrous guardian angel, Camilla? Did he finally bleed out, or did he realize you were just entirely too much dead weight to carry?" Camilla stood her ground, her posture immaculate, her face a mask of absolute indifference. She did not shrink under the cruel, shallow insults about her body. She knew her profound worth, and she knew exactly how this night would end. "Gennaro realized I am perfectly capable of taking out the trash myself," Camilla replied, her voice soft, steady, and chillingly confident. Priscilla laughed, a harsh, grating sound, and confidently raised her weapon. But before her manicured finger could even brush the trigger, the vast warehouse descended into absolute, pitch-black darkness. Camilla had seamlessly severed the main breaker grid. Instantly, the terrifying mechanical sound of Gennaro Russo's customized assault rifle echoed from the high catwalks above. He rained precise, calculated hell down upon the mercenaries, dropping 3 of them with lethal headshots in the span of 2 seconds. Blinding panic erupted. Muzzle flashes illuminated the dark in brief, violent strobes. Priscilla, realizing it was a devastating ambush, abandoned her dying men and sprinted forward through the chaotic shadows. She drew a serrated combat knife, determined to gut the arrogant doctor herself. But Camilla knew the exact, complex layout of the warehouse in the dark. As Priscilla lunged blindly around a towering stack of wooden pallets, Camilla stepped out smoothly from the flank. She did not use a gun. Instead, utilizing the sheer momentum of Priscilla's own chaotic charge, Camilla grabbed the assassin's wrist with incredible, unyielding strength, twisting it sharply against the joint until the bone snapped with a sickening, audible crack. Priscilla shrieked in agony, dropping the heavy knife. In one fluid, brutal motion, Camilla drove her knee directly into Priscilla's solar plexus, knocking the air violently from her lungs, and then slammed a specialized syringe filled with a heavy, non-lethal, fast-acting surgical paralytic straight into the side of Priscilla's neck. Priscilla crumpled heavily to the cold concrete floor, completely paralyzed from the neck down, but entirely conscious, her eyes wide with sheer, unadulterated terror as she stared up at the woman she had so foolishly underestimated. The deafening gunfire ceased. The remaining mercenaries were dead, their blood pooling on the factory floor. The backup emergency lights flickered on, casting a dim crimson glow across the absolute carnage. Gennaro descended the metal stairs, his dark, tailored suit completely flawless, his eyes fixed only on Camilla. He stepped casually over the bodies of his fallen enemies and looked down at the paralyzed, thoroughly defeated leader of the Marsh Syndicate. Then he looked at his woman. Camilla stood tall, her chest heaving slightly, possessing an aura of magnificent, unstoppable power. Gennaro walked up to her, cupping her soft, flushed face in his large, blood-stained hands, completely ignoring the destruction surrounding them. "You are the most magnificent creature God ever put on this earth," he murmured, his voice thick with raw, unfiltered worship and burning obsession. He leaned down, capturing her lips in a fierce, deeply possessive kiss that tasted of adrenaline, rain, and absolute victory. Camilla kissed him back eagerly, finally surrendering to the dark, consuming fire they had ignited in each other. She was no longer an invisible woman drinking tequila in the shadows. She was the undisputed, fiercely protected queen of the Chicago underworld, and the devil himself was on his knees for her. Did this high-stakes, gritty mafia romance leave you completely breathless? If you loved the intense dynamic between the brilliantly resilient Camilla and the ruthlessly obsessive Gennaro Russo, please hit that like button and share this story with your fellow dark romance lovers. Drop a comment below telling us what your favorite scene was or what tropes you want to see in our next gritty underworld tale. Do not forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you never miss a single gripping story.